Today, all day, I had the feeling it was time to review a new Spielberg film, eh? But there's a new bloody West Side Story out by Steven Spielberg. Someday, somewhere, he found a new way of doing West Side... Just get on with the review. That's right, West Side Story, or as I like to call it, Yes Please Maury. The original West Side Story is the second best musical of all time. It's a classic for a lot of reasons, but there are some things in that film which, looking at it now today, you think maybe you shouldn't have painted the entire Latinx cast a different colour. So I was incredibly excited and interested to see what they'd do with a new telling of West Side Story, and they just happened to get Spielberg on board. So that helps as well. So how did such a classic, loved and adored filmmaker like Spielberg do in his retelling of a musical theatre classic on the screen for us in 2021? I mean, there's no point beating around the bush anymore. Shit was wonderful. I fully loved this film. I thought a lot of what Spielberg and the team has done here is really, really interesting and feels like a worthwhile retelling of such a classic. It's no surprise that Spielberg's filmmaking trademarks just lend themselves perfectly to a musical, but it makes everything in this film just that much more beautiful and breathtaking to watch. All of the sort of mannerisms of Spielberg's filmmaking that we've come to love and come to know from him, the motivated camera work and all of that creativity in the way he navigates his scenes, complements the musical so well, constantly shifting between performers and dancers and voices and songs. It just feels like the perfect sort of complement and companion to Bernstein and Sondheim's incredible work with the music of the original West Side Story. And it means that you get to watch all of the classic musical numbers and the iconic moments that are just sort of engraved into our film memories, reworked and done in a way which just feels so natural and alive. The way that Spielberg moves throughout these set pieces, there's this real intention to the environments, and it pushes out into some new spaces that we haven't seen before, and it puts itself in the context of a area of New York that's getting torn down and people are getting relocated. So it's visually arresting in a very different way. It just never doesn't look gorgeous. There are certain shots which are like, hot damn, how have you done? How do you come up with this shot? And on top of just the Spielberg-ness of all of that, there are also a bunch of other updates in the film. There are a lot of little details in the film which have been tweaked or shifted or updated for this new retelling, which I think on the whole really, really work and flesh out a lot of things in the story and in the musical that aren't fleshed out in the original. The first and most obvious one of those being the representation in the cast. I don't need to explain the problems with the first one. They didn't have great Latinx representation for a film which is about such cultural themes that sort of need that representation. So it's fantastic to see Spielberg lean into that and really embrace that side of the culture here. It really does help the film much more than just feeling like it's ticking a box there. Like the representation from the cast really makes a lot of these characters and a lot of the source material come to life in a new way that we didn't quite see from the original film. And from that, with the new cast, it means we've got some amazing performances. I mean, on the whole, the cast of this thing just fucking knocks it out the park. Rachel Zegler's Maria is so good, I want to be best friends with her. How do I go about doing that? Her voice is just sort of help me good. You know what I mean? Do we need to call it out? How are you doing it? And she's an insanely likable and emotive Maria, which really helps when we get to the second act of West Side Story. But other standouts for me in the film were Ariana DeBose as Anita, who just, I mean, seriously killed it. One of the better performances of the year. Obviously, it would be sacrilege to sit here and say any bad words about Rita Moreno's Anita from the original. Not going to do that, but this does feel like Ariana DeBose makes it her own and does her own things with it and fleshes it out in really, really wonderful and captivating ways. She's got a killer voice. She danced like a motherfucker. Loved her in this film. But I also loved Mike Faist as Riff, and I was really surprised at how much Riff's character feels so much more realized and fleshed out in this film. Riff was always a really weird character in the original, where he's just sort of an archetype head of a gang bad guy, and it works for what it's trying to do in the original, but it never really went that deep for me, and there were always felt like there were themes that were just sort of slightly coming up to the surface but never really diving into. And here with Mike Faith's performance, we just get more of that, and I think it just goes a bit deeper into his character, and I found that infinitely more satisfying and engaging as a performance. He was amazing. It really, really surprised me. Everyone else is really good as well. There's no one that really drops the ball, but I will be honest, I didn't really love this rendition of Tony. It wasn't bad enough to ruin any moments, but definitely had this strange sort of cockiness to it, which I don't know necessarily works as well as I think the original did. Sure, Tony's a cocky character and there's definitely elements of that in there, but there's this really weird sort of dorky, quirky playfulness to Richard Braymer's original Tony, which I think is lost here. And I can understand why it loses that, because of the little details they add to the film to try and flesh it out in a different context. But I just found that new version of Tony not really to work as well for me, and performance just didn't really do a whole lot for me. It was really the scenes between Anita and Maria that I found much more sort of engaging and engrossing and emotional than the scenes between Maria and Tony. But that emotion in the film is something which I also found to be an interesting twist from the original. The way it shifts certain things to get different emotional payoffs in the film, I thought was really interestingly done and really effectively done. I won't spoil the specific changes that are made here, but there are definitely certain songs which come before others in this version and are swapped around or given to different people, which adds a different perspective, which makes it sadder and emotional in different ways than the original one. The biggest one that comes to the top of mind is the reframing of the Somewhere song, which is stunning in this film and is really beautifully done, but is given to a different character, and so ends up pulling out these different feelings of generations and the past and legacy through cultures. It was super emotional in a way which just doesn't really get fully dived into in the original. And it's moments like that which I think are where this film really, really works and really, really does its best stuff, which I think in many ways does make it more, I guess, emotionally rich and effective in that sense. But I do think sometimes it can come off as being a little bit too much, can sometimes feel like it's spelling things out where I would have liked to have seen it expressed a little bit more subtly or visually, like in the first one. But B sometimes feels like an interesting alternative, but still not quite as effective as the original. For instance, the Rumble, the main sort of, I suppose, climactic event that changes things in this film. The way that's presented in the original is obviously this stunning red expressive underpass below this bridge, and the fight feels much more, I guess, operatic, theatrical, because they're dancing at each other as they are through the entire first one. And here that location is shifted to just this sort of old salt warehouse where they've got grit to lay the roads with, which I guess is an attempt to be more gritty, eh? Am I right? And I'm not complaining about the fact that it's been put there, because it makes a lot of sense for the style of this one. And the fight feels much more like a fight, like a dangerous fight with consequences, which adds its own added layers of fear and tension. But I'd still prefer the theatrical, over-the-top, expressive way that it's done in the original. And there are lots of bits like that where I fully understand the changes, and I even like a lot of the changes, and I know why they're making things better overall. I think they add a lot more to this film and they flesh out things, but I just sort of prefer the way it's done in the original, which I suppose is a somewhat unfair brush to paint this thing with, because it's always going to be coming up against the fact that it's been done before, and that we know the way it's been done before because it's the fucking West Side Story. But I can't help but that's sometimes just the way I felt about a lot of scenes in this film. But that being said, I think one of the other really strong positives of this film that come about from some of those changes and some of those shifts are the Jets and the Sharks conflict, like the gang's rivalry and the consequences of the gang's actions feel much more prominent in this thing and feel much more effective, I think. And I think you feel that clash much more, and the rumble that ends up happening feels like it has higher stakes, and that's because of some subtle changes to the screenplay, but also I think again it's down to Spielberg's way of leading us through the story and the musical numbers. The musical numbers in the original all feels like it's there to show off insanely stunning choreography, gorgeous expressive colors, and just obviously some of the best musical numbers ever written. And those are still there here, but Spielberg's approach feels like it has that, but it also wants to lead us with the camera through the characters' mindsets and through where they're changing in the story, which is obviously what Spielberg does best, taking us from these wide oneers into these very close-up pointed shots in one take. That's obviously great in a musical sense for keeping things fluid and having this sense of energy throughout, propelling us through musical number to musical number, but it also does much more in the way it's able to visually suggest things about characters, so we're picking up more about these characters outside of the musical numbers that we're given, which I fully welcome, and I think has a lot to do with how effective this film ends up being in the end. This feels like a completely deserved and earned reimagining of an all-timer, which is not an easy feat to do, but is just more testament to the power of Spielberg as a filmmaker. If you love the original West Side Story, I've no doubt that you're also going to find a lot to really enjoy here. If you've never seen West Side Story, you're in for a fucking beyond a treat. But above all, I'm just so happy that all the pieces I wanted to work about this version of West Side Story are there and they are working. But what about you guys? Have you caught West Side Story? Are you excited to check it out? Let me know what you thought about it in the comments down below. Let me know where you think it stands against the original. Of course, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see me talk about more shit, go ahead and click subscribe. Buttons down there. It's fun to click, I heard. I'll see you guys soon for some more thoughts on more films. But until next time, I'm going to go loiter on the end of my street and click a few times. And probably get arrested.